Where is Mexico?
That question, asked by a 7-year-old California boy in 1931, still hangs in the air like smoke, doesn't it? He was born in Los Angeles, spoke English with a lisp, and had never, not once, crossed the border. Imagine that. 2 days later, he was herded onto a southbound train, labeled a voluntary repatriate, and simply erased from the only country he had ever called home. Can you even fathom it? Most of us never learned this happened. Our textbooks, they just skip right over it. Our grandparents, they often stayed quiet, the memories too painful, too shameful to share. Yet between 1929 and 1936, the United States, your country, my country, expelled up to 2 million people of Mexican ancestry. And here's the kicker. Well over half of them were U.S.-born citizens. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't some distant war or a foreign policy misstep. This was a domestic tragedy, a mass deportation that targeted its own. Today, we're going to follow one family's harrowing journey through the largest, most systematically forgotten mass expulsion in American history. And we're going to uncover why we still act like it never occurred. Why has this profound betrayal of American ideals been swept under the rug for so long? It's a story that demands to be told, to be remembered. Chapter 1. The Setup. Picture this. It's 1929. The roaring 20s are sputtering out. Flappers are still dancing, but the music's getting quieter. The stock market, it's not just crashing, it's imploding, taking fortunes and futures with it. Bread lines are snaking around city blocks, stretching further than the eye can see. In Detroit, massive auto plants, once symbols of American ingenuity, are shuttering their doors, laying off thousands. Out in the fertile San Joaquin Valley, lettuce rots in the fields because no one, absolutely no one, can afford to buy it. Jobs vanish overnight, leaving millions desperate. And when people get desperate, when fear takes hold, politicians often look for a scapegoat, don't they? They needed one fast. Enter Secretary of Labor William Doak, a man with a plan, or so he thought. He steps up, claiming that large alien labor is hampering relief efforts. Never mind that these so-called alien laborers had been the backbone of the economy for decades. Suddenly, the narrative shifts. Newspapers, always eager for a sensational headline, start running stories about Mexican dependency, painting a picture of a drain on public resources. What they conveniently ignored, what they actively chose to forget, was that Mexican Americans had powered the very railroads that connected the nation, toiled in the dangerous mines, and nurtured the vast citrus groves that quite literally built the American Southwest. They weren't a burden. They were essential. In places like Los Angeles, county supervisors were doing the math, cold and hard. Their calculation? Shipping one family south, across the border, would save them a measly $14 a month in relief aid. $14. That was the price they put on a family's home, their life, their citizenship. Portland, Chicago, and Denver, among other cities, quickly adopted this chillingly simple yet utterly flawed economic logic. The word they used was repatriation. It sounded polite, almost benevolent, didn't it? Like they were just helping the lost find their way home. But in reality, repatriation became a sinister euphemism for something far darker. Ethnic cleansing, carried out without the international outrage or the historical condemnation it deserved. It was a calculated act of dehumanization, dressed up in bureaucratic language. Chapter 2. The First Raids, the morning of February 26, 1931. Imagine it. La Placita Park in Los Angeles. Families are strolling after Sunday Mass, the scent of churros in the air, children laughing. It's a typical peaceful Sunday. Then, without warning, the scene shatters. Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS agents, backed by city cops, descend. They seal off all the exits, trapping everyone inside. They demand papers, often without legal authority, and in less than an hour they arrest 400 people. 400 lives, upended in 60 minutes. Children, still clutching their melting ice cream cones, watch in terror as their fathers are roughly thrown into wagons, their pleas ignored. Officers aren't looking for evidence. They're sorting arrestees by skin tone, by the sound of their accents. A darker complexion, a certain lilt in your voice. These superficial traits could decide your fate, regardless of where you were born. There were no warrants, no hearings, no right to phone calls, no due process whatsoever. Just arbitrary power, wielded with impunity. And it wasn't just Los Angeles. Similar, brutal raids hit San Antonio barrios, Denver railroad yards, and the bustling Gary steel mills. The newspapers, instead of questioning the legality or morality, cheered, trumpeting headlines about savings for taxpayers. Employers, who had once actively recruited Mexican labor, now turned on their workers, firing entire crews overnight. Landlords, feeling the pressure, evicted tenants with chilling pronouncements like, "The government says you're leaving." Merchants, once friendly, refused credit. The message was clear, stark, and terrifying. The choice became, leave hungry or starve where you stand. It was a systematic campaign of fear and economic strangulation designed to coerce people into leaving. This coercion often hid behind official-looking forms, printed exclusively in English, confusingly marked "Request for Voluntary Departure." Illiterate laborers, desperate and disoriented, were pressured to sign these documents, often with just a thumbprint. They were unaware that by doing so, they were surrendering their fundamental rights, including any future claim to return to the only country many of them had ever known. Agents would promise that trains would wait, but then they'd leave early, stranding families. Suitcases, filled with meager belongings and precious memories, were stolen. Jewelry, often the only family heirloom, was confiscated for safekeeping, never to be seen again. It was a betrayal at every turn, a systematic dismantling of lives. Chapter 3. Maria and Antonio. Let's zoom in, if we can, on one of those lives. Let's talk about Maria Alvarez. She was born in El Paso, Texas in 1905, a U.S. citizen from birth. Her husband, Antonio, was a naturalized citizen, a hard-working man who had literally laid tracks for the Southern Pacific Railroad, helping to build the very infrastructure of this nation. They rented a small house by the Los Angeles River, a modest but proud home. Together, they raised 6 kids, grew corn in their yard, a little piece of home and a new land. But then the Depression hit Antonio's wages, slashing them by half. Maria, a resilient woman, took in sewing, doing whatever she could to keep her family afloat. They were struggling, yes, but they were a family, rooted, trying to make it work. Then the whispers started. Neighbors, well-meaning perhaps, would mention that relief workers were offering train tickets, saying it was to keep families together. A cruel lie, veiled as compassion. One July dawn, the knock came. Not a polite knock, but a thunderous pounding. Deputies kicked the door open, flashed their guns, and gave Maria and Antonio 20 minutes to pack. 20 minutes to decide what bits of their life they could carry, what memories they could salvage. Maria, her hands trembling, frantically stuffed her children's birth certificates into a flour sack, her desperate hope that these precious papers, these proofs of American identity, would somehow protect them. Her oldest son, Pedro, just a boy himself, instinctively grabbed his baby sibling, trying to shield him from the chaos. At the station, the dehumanization continued. Agents separated men from women. Antonio was forced onto a different car. Maria never saw him again. Can you imagine that final, agonizing glimpse? The terror in his eyes, the unspoken goodbyes. Years later, she would learn the brutal truth. He was dropped in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, and tragically, shot by raiders who assumed deportees carried dollars. His life, his contributions, his family, all extinguished for nothing. In Mexico City, Maria and her 6 children were crammed into a single, tiny room. A U.S. citizen, displaced and destitute. Pedro, forced to grow up far too fast, quit school to sell gum on the streets, trying to provide for his shattered family. The toddler, who Pedro had clutched so tightly at the station, died of measles, a preventable tragedy, because Maria couldn't afford the medicine. Maria, heartbroken, wrote letters to the U.S. consul, begging for a way to return home. The reply was always cold, always final. No funds for repatriation. Her English, once fluent, began to fade. Her children's Spanish, once just a second language, thickened. They became, by the cruelest twist of fate, strangers in two countries, belonging fully to neither. Their American dream, shattered, replaced by a Mexican nightmare. Chapter 4. Citizenship means nothing. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but these folks, they were undocumented, right? Illegal immigrants? And that's where the story takes an even more infuriating turn. Wrong. So profoundly wrong. Census data, painstakingly pieced together years later, shows that a staggering 60% of those expelled held U.S. citizenship. And California's state Senate, after its own investigations, later estimated that figure to be closer to 70%. Let that sink in. Your own government, deporting its own citizens. Officials simply presumed anyone with a Mexican surname, anyone who looked or sounded Mexican, was deportable. It was ethnic profiling on a massive state-sanctioned scale. Take Cruz Reynoso, for instance. He would go on to become a future California Supreme Court justice, a pillar of the American legal system. But he vividly recalled standing on a depot platform at age 7, asking that same heartbreaking question. Where is Mexico? He was an American citizen. He wasn't alone. Entire classrooms in Riverside, California, suddenly found themselves with half their desks empty overnight. Kids just vanished. One brave Kansas City principal protested this injustice, speaking out against the raids. What happened to her? The school board promptly fired her for hindering public policy. That's how deep the complicity ran. The Fifth Amendment to our Constitution promises due process, a fair hearing before you can be deprived of life, liberty, or property. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law for all citizens. Both were not just bent, they were utterly ignored. Federal lawyers, with a chilling legalistic sleight of hand, argued that since these were voluntary departures, they skirted judicial review. No court necessary, no messy legal challenges. When plaintiffs, years later, actually tried to sue, seeking justice for this monumental wrong, the courts delivered another devastating blow. They ruled that the government had no legal duty to its citizens once they had crossed the border. Think about the implications of that. Your citizenship, your birthright, could be nullified the moment you stepped onto foreign soil, often against your will. This precedent still stands, an unmarked landmine waiting for future crises, a gaping loophole in the promise of American citizenship. It is a chilling reminder of how easily rights can be eroded when fear and prejudice take hold. Chapter 5. The Math of Erasure. So how do you remove 1 million people, many of them citizens, without leaving a paper trail, without the kind of historical record that screams injustice? Well, you get creative with bureaucracy. You make sure the records disappear or are deliberately obscured. County relief offices, the very places meant to help the destitute, paid the rail fares for these repatriates, then neatly marked their files, closed, left state. No mention of forced removal, no details of coercion, just a tidy bureaucratic end. Population records meticulously counted departures, but made no effort to track destinations, let alone the circumstances of those departures. Mexican government archives, on the other hand, diligently listed arrivals, documenting the influx of bewildered, often English-speaking Mexicans into their country. Yet, U.S. agencies consistently denied ever ordering these mass expulsions. It was a coordinated, quiet campaign of plausible deniability. Even more disturbingly, the Bureau of Immigration, the very agency responsible, systematically destroyed ship manifests and other crucial records. It was as if they wanted to wipe the slate clean, to erase any evidence that this ever happened. Today, historians acting like forensic detectives have to compare notes using fragmented clues. Local newspapers often biased, but still a record. Dusty cemetery plots, marking those who never returned. And precious family Bibles, where birth and death dates were recorded alongside the names of the disappeared. It's a testament to their dedication that we know anything at all. And what about the economic rationale, the supposed savings? Economists, after careful study, now estimate that the entire program saved municipalities roughly $1.50 per resident. To put that in perspective, that was less than the cost of a movie ticket back then. Think about it. Families shattered, lives destroyed, for a pittance. The ultimate irony. Farm wages instantly dropped in the very counties that had lost these workers, proving conclusively that the expulsion was nothing more than political theater, a cruel distraction, not an economic cure. It was a short-sighted, discriminatory policy that ultimately harmed the very communities it claimed to help, leaving behind a legacy of shame and a void in the historical record. Chapter 6. Life on the Other Side. Imagine being dumped in a Mexican border town, a place you've never known, where you might not even speak the language. That's what happened to hundreds of thousands of deportees. They faced immediate brutal realities, crushing poverty, severe language barriers, and a pervasive, often cruel anti-foreign prejudice from locals who saw them as Americanized outsiders. To add to the misery, typhus outbreaks were common in these overcrowded, under-resourced communities. Relief kitchens, meager as they were, could only serve coffee and tortillas once a day. That was it. The economic desperation was immediate and profound. Jobs paying 10 cents a day, barely enough to survive, attracted thousands, leading to bitter fights and further social disintegration. It was a struggle for basic survival. American-born teenagers, caught in this impossible limbo, often banded together, forming their own defiant groups. They called themselves Los Invisibles, the invisible ones, because they felt they were neither gringo nor Mexicano, belonging nowhere. It was a profound identity crisis, forced upon them by their own government. Some families, unable to bear the conditions in the border towns, trekked further south, sometimes hundreds of miles, to states like Michoacán or Veracruz, arriving penniless and exhausted. The locals, still viewing them with suspicion, coined a derogatory slur, repa, short for repatriado. It was a mark of shame, a constant reminder of their unwanted status. One woman, her voice heavy with sorrow, told an oral historian years later, "We were unwanted up north and strangers down here. Our homeland became a hallway we couldn't escape." Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, many refused to be erased. They resisted. It's a heartbreaking image, isn't it? Trapped in a perpetual state of transit, never truly at home. They formed mutual aid clubs, creating their own support networks. They built new colonias, or neighborhoods, on the outskirts of cities, carving out spaces for themselves. They even staged plays in English, a defiant act, a way to keep their language, their culture, and their American memories alive. These were acts of incredible resilience, a refusal to let their identity be stripped away. And it was their children, growing up in this liminal space, who became teachers, nurses, and engineers. Decades later, it would be these descendants carrying the weight of their ancestors' trauma and the fire of their resistance who would apply crucial pressure for official U.S. acknowledgement, demanding that this forgotten chapter finally be written into history. Chapter 7. Trying to come home. By 1940, the world was at war. The Great Depression was fading, replaced by the booming demands of war industries. Suddenly, the U.S. needed labor again, desperately. The very people they had so cruelly expelled a decade earlier were now needed. The State Department, with a characteristic lack of fanfare or apology, quietly told border guards to admit former residents of good character. No formal announcement, no public mea culpa. Just a quiet, almost cynical word-of-mouth instruction among growers and border agents. It was a policy shift, born of convenience, not conscience. Returnees, cautiously making their way back, often arrived to find their homes demolished, their bank accounts gone, and county records, the last vestiges of their lives, mysteriously burned. It was as if they had never existed. Maria's oldest son, Pedro, now a young man, crossed back into the U.S. at El Paso in 1943. An officer asked if he was Mexican. Pedro, with a quiet defiance, simply answered, "I'm American." The guard, with a dismissive laugh, stamped DP, deported person, on a card, a scarlet letter of a different kind, and let him through. Pedro, an American citizen, spent the next 40 years picking beets, his education, his dreams, all lost to the fields. His own kids, growing up in the shadow of his trauma, spoke only English, a deliberate shield against accent-based shame, a desperate attempt to blend in, to avoid their father's fate. When Congress later passed the landmark 1965 Immigration Act, a sweeping overhaul of immigration policy, it made no mention, not a single word, of the Mexican repatriation. It was as if history began fresh each decade, neatly compartmentalized, the inconvenient truths brushed aside. This deliberate omission spoke volumes, reinforcing the idea that this was a chapter the nation simply didn't want to confront. Chapter 8. The Silence. Why didn't survivors testify more widely? Why did this enormous injustice remain hidden for so long? The reasons are complex, deeply human, and heartbreaking. Shame played a massive part. Being marched out, branded a failure, an unwanted burden, left deep psychological scars. Legal status, even for citizens, felt incredibly flimsy. Complaining, speaking out, risked deportation all over again. Imagine living with that constant fear. Mainstream newspapers, eager to maintain a narrative of national unity and patriotic morale, largely ignored the returnees. Their stories didn't fit the triumphant post-war narrative. Even Mexican-American veterans who bravely fought in Deported for a country that had betrayed their families returned home only to face segregated bars and outright refusal of GI Bill housing loans. They had proven their loyalty, shed their blood, yet still faced discrimination. For many, the choice became survival over storytelling. They focused on rebuilding their lives, protecting their children, rather than reliving the trauma in public. The pain was too raw, the risk too high. Academics, too, for decades, largely looked away. It's astonishing, but the first comprehensive scholarly book on the topic, Francisco Valderrama and Raymond Rodriguez's seminal work, Decade of Betrayal, didn't appear until 1995. Before that, the event existed mainly in hushed diaries, the mournful melodies of corridos, and the whispered stories passed down through generations. It was an oral history, a lived trauma, but not yet a recognized historical fact. Even today, only a handful of states bother to include it in their high school history standards. It's a stark reminder of how easily inconvenient truths can be erased from collective memory if we don't actively fight to keep them alive. Chapter 9. California says sorry. But silence, no matter how profound, can't last forever. In 2005, California State Senator Gil Cedillo, a man with a deep commitment to social justice, stumbled upon Francisco Valderrama's groundbreaking research. He was shocked, outraged, and moved to act. Cedillo drafted an apology bill, seeking official recognition for the immense wrong committed. Of course, there was opposition. Critics argued, "We can't judge the past by present morals." A familiar refrain, isn't it? But then something powerful happened. Survivors, now elderly, frail, but resolute, packed committee rooms. They carried faded train tickets, tangible proofs of their ordeal. One woman, her voice trembling but clear, lifted a yellowed tag, still marked deep, deported. "This," she declared, "this is my scarlet letter." Her words, her presence, her undeniable truth cut through the political rhetoric. The bill passed. In 2006, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger signed it into law, expressing deep regret for the unjust removal and violation of constitutional rights. It was a historic moment, a crack in the wall of silence. However, and this is a crucial point, no reparations followed. The apology was symbolic, a recognition of wrong, but not an attempt to mend the material damage. Scholars often call this symbolic politics, and while it certainly is for the families, for the survivors, it cracked that wall wide open. It validated their pain, their stories, their very existence. Since then, Colorado and Illinois have issued similar regrets, following California's lead. Activists continue to push for national acknowledgement, but bills proposing it often stall in committee, deemed too divisive. Meanwhile, something else is happening. Genealogy sites are seeing spikes in users searching terms like repatriation apellido, repatriation surname, hoping to learn where their grandfathers, their great-aunts, their entire family lines simply disappeared. They're searching for answers, for connection, for a history that was deliberately hidden from them. The truth, it seems, has a way of finding its way out, even after decades of suppression. Chapter 10. Why it matters now. Fast forward to today. Listen closely to any debate about birthright citizenship, about mass workplace raids, about self-deportation. What do you hear? The same rhetoric, the same chilling echoes. Job stealing, welfare draining. It's like a broken record, isn't it? The language, the fear-mongering, it hasn't really changed. Courts still allow expedited removal without counsel, meaning people can be deported quickly, without access to lawyers, without a fair chance to present their case. Children, tragically, remain in cages at our borders. And yes, American citizens are still mistakenly detained, caught in the dragnet of immigration enforcement. History, as they say, doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it certainly rhymes, and often it rhymes with a heavy Southern accent. Understanding the 1930s isn't just an academic exercise. It's a vital lesson in how incredibly fragile our rights become in moments of economic panic, in times of national anxiety. Citizenship papers, that sacred document, offer little shield when fear overrides the rule of law, when prejudice trumps principle. If we forget this dark chapter, if we allow it to remain buried, we essentially greenlight the next expulsion, the next betrayal, just under a different name. Memory isn't just about the past. It's our only inoculation against repeating its gravest mistakes. It's our best defense against the erosion of our fundamental values. Chapter 11. Voices We Still Can Hear. In 2008, NPR, ever a chronicler of human stories, recorded Maria, the very Maria Alvarez we spoke of earlier, then a remarkable 103 years old. Her voice, cracked with age but still resonant, sang "My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean" in English, followed by the lilting strains of "Cielito Lindo" in Spanish. She explained, with a wisdom born of immense suffering and resilience, songs don't need passports. Before she passed away, she made a poignant request. Her ashes were to be split half-scattered in the Los Angeles River, the place where her American life had been so cruelly interrupted, and half in Michoacan, Mexico, the land where she was forced to rebuild. It was a final, powerful statement about her dual identity, her divided heart. Her grandson, now a professor of Chicano studies, starts each semester with a simple yet profound question for his students. Where is home? Students write their answers on post-it notes, creating a vibrant mosaic on the classroom wall, a tapestry of belonging, of displacement, of longing. It's a living testament to the enduring impact of a history that tried to erase itself. Another survivor, Refugio Reyes, kept his deportation tag, that physical embodiment of his trauma, in a coffee can. When asked why he saved it, why he held on to such a painful relic, he said, with a quiet intensity, "So my kids know fear once wore a number, not a face." Think about that. Not a monster, not a cartoon villain, but a number, a bureaucratic dehumanization. These objects, these tangible remnants of injustice, outlive policies. And these stories, these whispers and songs, they outlast governments. They are the true archives of human experience, demanding to be heard, demanding to be remembered. If this is the first time you've heard about the Mexican repatriation, you are absolutely not alone. This history was deliberately obscured. So, please, hit that like button so the algorithm, in its infinite wisdom, shows it to someone else who missed this crucial, heartbreaking chapter. And I urge you, share your family's migration story below, whether it was by choice or by coercion, whether recent or generations ago. Let's piece together the map they tried so desperately to erase. Let's fill in the blanks of our collective past. Chapter 12. The Numbers Today. The ripple effects of this historical event continue to shape our present. Researchers estimate that roughly 30% of the deportees eventually managed to return north, driven by economic necessity or an unbreakable longing for their true home. But that means a staggering 700,000 people never did. Their descendants, today, number in the millions, many completely unaware that their great-grandparents, their ancestors, were U.S. citizens, forcibly removed from their own country. It's a silent wound, a missing piece of their family narrative. DNA testing companies, those modern-day genealogists, often report unexpected clusters of Mexican matches across the Midwest, in places far from the border. These aren't random occurrences. They are the genetic footprints of those southbound trains that emptied barrios, leaving behind a legacy of absence and unanswered questions. It's the past reaching out, trying to tell its story through our very DNA. Economists have also drawn a direct, chilling link between the 1930s labor shortage, exacerbated by the repatriations, and the later Bracero programs. This illustrates a cynical, recurring cycle. Expel when wages dip and the economy struggles, then import when labor needs rise again, when the crops need picking and the factories need workers. The same Central Valley counties that cheered on the raids in 1931, eager to rid themselves of burdens, were begging for guest workers just over a decade later in 1942. It's a stark, brutal reminder that memory, for too many, lasts only about 70 years, while the demands of the labor market, sadly, often last only a season. It's a cycle of exploitation, forgotten and repeated. Chapter 13. Teaching the Next Generation. How do we ensure this history isn't forgotten again? How do we inoculate the next generation against such a profound betrayal? Some innovative teachers use role-play exercises, bringing the trauma to life in a controlled, educational environment. Students receive mock orders to leave class, experiencing, even briefly, the arbitrary nature of such commands. Then, they discuss due process, what it means, and why it's so vital. Others analyze vintage newspapers, dissecting the loaded terms like alien hordes or Mexican dependency, showing how language can be weaponized to dehumanize and justify injustice. One Texas school district, commendably, pairs the Mexican repatriation with the Japanese-American internment during World War II. It's a powerful comparison, exploring the chilling patterns of racialized scapegoating during times of national crisis. It highlights how fear can lead to the erosion of rights for entire communities, regardless of citizenship. Yet despite these efforts, most states still list this topic as optional in their history curricula. Textbook publishers, often citing space constraints, conveniently omit it. Meanwhile, heated debates rage over banned books, particularly those depicting border crossings or the immigrant experience. It's a strange irony, isn't it? If history is indeed prologue, if the past truly informs the present, then omission is not just an oversight. It is, quite frankly, complicity. It's a deliberate choice to keep us uninformed, to keep us vulnerable to repeating these painful chapters. Chapter 14. What official acknowledgement could look like. So, what would genuine official acknowledgement look like? What would it take to truly reckon with this past? Advocates propose a national day of remembrance, a dedicated time for reflection and education. They call for a permanent plaque in Los Angeles' La Placita, a solemn memorial at the very site of one of the most brutal raids. They push for mandatory inclusion in AP US history standards, ensuring that every American student learns this vital, painful truth. Some even call for a commission, similar to the one that studied reparations for slavery, to explore the lasting impact and potential avenues for restorative justice. Others advocate for mandatory training for all ICE agents, incorporating the abuses of the 1930s into their curriculum, hoping to inject memory and empathy into policy to prevent future atrocities. Of course, critics often warn of opening Pandora's box of apologies, fearing a cascade of demands for historical redress. But let's look at the world. Germany funds memorials to atrocities committed during the Holocaust, a profound act of national reckoning. South Africa held truth and reconciliation commissions, a painful but necessary step towards healing after apartheid. And the US itself paid reparations to Japanese-American internees, acknowledging a similar egregious violation of civil liberties. Acknowledging one injustice doesn't diminish others. It doesn't open a floodgate of endless apologies. Instead, it signals something far more fundamental. It signals that rights are real, that citizenship means something, and that our nation is capable of learning from its mistakes. It's about strengthening the fabric of our democracy, not tearing it apart. Chapter 15. The Cost of Silence. The cost of silence, of deliberate forgetting, is profound and far-reaching. Psychologists describe something called historical trauma, emotional wounds transmitted across generations, a legacy of suffering that impacts families long after the original events. Symptoms can include hypervigilance, a constant state of alert, a tragic loss of language, and cultural identity, as communities try to assimilate to avoid further persecution, and a deep-seated fear of authority. Studies have shown that Mexican-American seniors who lived through the raids exhibit higher rates of depression, even when controlling for income and other socioeconomic factors. The trauma, the betrayal, it never truly leaves you. Silence in this context doesn't heal. It magnifies the harm, allowing the wounds to fester. Naming the injustice, speaking its truth, is the first crucial step towards healing. And so, communities are reclaiming their identity, their history, through art. Murals depicting trains but painted with monarch butterflies, symbolizing migration and transformation, rather than forced expulsion. Theater pieces where actors wear suitcase tags, bringing to life the stories of those who were forced to leave. Corridos, those traditional Mexican ballads that once whispered stories of shame, now sing anthems of pride and resilience. Memory in these acts of creation becomes resistance. Creativity becomes the antidote to amnesia, a powerful way to heal, to reclaim, and to ensure that this history, once silenced, now sings. History isn't just dusty dates in a textbook. It's the air we breathe, the ground we walk on, the stories that shape who we are. If this story moves you, if it makes you think, then please subscribe for more forgotten pasts that explain our complicated present. And comment with one word you associate with home. Let us see how many definitions can fit under one flag, how many different meanings we can find in that single, powerful word. Conclusion. The boy who asked, "Where is Mexico?" became a man who, like Maria and Antonio, never felt fully at home in either country. His question, simple yet devastating, should haunt us all, because citizenship is so much more than just a passport. It's a sacred promise. When panic, when fear, trumps due process, when we trade our neighbors for sensational headlines and political expediency, we don't just deport people, we deport pieces of ourselves, pieces of our national conscience. Remembering the Mexican repatriation isn't about wallowing in guilt, it's about vigilance. It's about understanding the mechanisms of injustice so we can recognize them when they inevitably reappear. Next time talk show hosts promise easy fixes to complex problems, next time politicians scapegoat a visible minority, picture that child holding a flour sack of birth certificates, wondering why the map suddenly moved beneath his feet. Picture Maria, never seeing her husband again. Picture Pedro, his dreams deferred. If history can vanish 1 million citizens overnight, if it can erase their stories from the record for decades, then it can absolutely happen again, unless we keep asking, loudly, persistently, where is home? And unless we stubbornly, defiantly, refuse to let silence answer for us.